This episode of the Pedalshift Project is brought to you by members of the Pedalshift Society. If you like what you hear, you can help support the show at pedalshift.net/society. Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/152, and you can email the show, pedalshift@pedalshift.net, or call the voicemail hotline 202-930-1109, and check Pedalshift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and happy February to you. This is Tim Mooney, and I am back for episode number 152 of the Pedalshift Project. If you are a regular listener, you may be surprised, when we just put it that way, that you're hearing from me and not a best of show. Normally, the first week of the month, I tend to do best of shows. This month, we have what I can only characterize as breaking news. So I am going to be suspending the best of for this week, for this month, and we'll go back to the best of profile, maybe, unless there's more breaking news next month. And it's a good one too, so stick around for the first week of March for the next best of. In any event, this episode we're going to be talking about the Great American Rail Trail, and I've got a fantastic guest. I've got Kevin Mills, who is the Senior Vice President of Policy of the Rails-to-Trails Conservancy, and he's going to be talking all about this. You've probably all heard about this prior to listening about it on this show, because they've done a really good job at the Rails-to-Trails Conservancy about getting the word out about this. I call it a moonshot, and it really is. It is a moonshot. It is a pie in the sky. I think it's better than pie in the sky, but it is a bold example of leadership of trying to get basically a rail trail that connects Washington, D.C. to just outside of Seattle, Washington. And who knows, maybe by the time this thing all comes to fruition in the next decade or two, they'll actually figure out a way to connect it to Seattle as well, which would be super convenient for me because I've got family in Seattle. I live here in DC. Man, that would be great. I could just bike to go see my cousin, right? It would be super cool. Anyways, we're going to talk to Kevin in a minute. I wanted to throw out a little bit more about housekeeping because I've actually got another fun announcement as well for future meetups. So let's circle back to that. First up, reminder, we've got the podcast sponsor slots that are available starting, now. And if you're interested, check it out at pedalshift.net/sponsor for more info. I've had a few people reach out. It's been pretty cool working with some new folks. You may notice I'm not just jumping right into it. I'm being a little selective here. So that's why sometimes you're not hearing sponsor slots every once in a while. But in any event, it is available to you if you are interested. Pedalshift.net/sponsor for more info there. Of course, if you're hearing this on the day of release, I am probably gearing up to bicycle across Florida right now. I'm in the middle of it. Tour Journals Volume 13, Cross Florida Tour. The first episode is going to drop out 1 week from this episode, Thursday at 7 a.m. The weather looks to be about as perfect as you can get for a Florida winter bicycle tour. We're talking highs around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. We're talking about lows maybe just bottoming out all the way down to the mid-50s. It sounds great. No rain either, which is unusual for me in recent tours. So I might just actually be lucking out with this one. So check it all out starting next week. Meetups and live shows. I've got some new stuff. I got some old stuff. Let's start with the old stuff that I've been talking about. If you are in the Orlando area on Saturday, February 9th, we've got all the details finalized. 2 to 4 p.m. We're going to be at the Thirsty Topher, and that's in the Barley Row section of Orlando. It's just north of downtown Orlando. If you are able to get there, go to pedalshift.net/Orlando, sign up, RSVP, let me know you're thinking about coming, and there's more info there as well. Pedalshift.net/Orlando. Pedalshift Live. If you have not been unable to make any of these meetups because, you are geographically not in these places, Pedalshift Live is a way for you to come hang with everyone, because if you've got an internet connection, you can hang. Friday, February 22nd, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Go to pedalshift.net/live. It's going to be the wrap-up show for the Cross Florida Tour, the takeaways, all of that other good stuff. Again, the Ask Me Anything section. Email me your questions, pedalshift@pedalshift.net. You can either do that now, tomorrow, the day after that, as long as you do it before Friday, February 22nd at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. You're good, and looking forward to it. I'm excited about sharing this Florida ride with you, all the good and all the bad. And as I sit here right now, I don't know any of it. I'm in the middle of it as you hear this, but me right now, Time Machine, Don't even know. It should be interesting. Check that out. Friday, February 22nd, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Big announcement time. I am super excited about this. Pedalshift and the Sprocket Podcast, we are teaming up for the first ever Podcast Palooza ride in Portland, Oregon. I am so stoked for this. The tentative date is either Friday, June 14th or Saturday, June 15th. We're still kind of wrapping our minds around this one, but hold those dates. If you are in Portland, you're Portland adjacent, or better yet, you've always been wanting to do a Pedal Palooza ride and you keep hearing about this nonsense, if you're not familiar, basically the day after I moved away from Portland, decided to get super extra biking. And an informal festival of bicycling happens every June. Again, literally, I think the year that I moved away, they started doing this. And it's a really rad, really cool. And so lots of different people do these different rides and they all have different themes. And so the Sprocket and Pedalshift and a few other special guests we'll be revealing later as we add on here. We're going to be doing a podcast-centric bicycle ride around the city of Portland. We're going to be we're just going to be doing it up. We're going to be doing a fun ride, first of all, on the bicycle. Bring your bike, rent a bike. We're going to do interviews mid-ride. We're going to have some cool stops. And of course, we're going to have the live show following, plus a meetup. And how that's all going to look and feel still a little bit up in the air. So we'll have more details as we go along. You can check it out. Of course, all details at pedalshift.net/events. Next up on the show is the interview, and this is with, as I mentioned at the top, with Kevin Mills. He is the Senior Vice President of Policy of the Rails-to-Trails Conservancy, and we are chatting extensively about the Great American Rail Trail. And we'll get a little bit more into the details of it in the interview, but I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of an intro to Kevin. As I mentioned, Senior Vice President of Policy of the Rails-to-Trails Conservancy, which is based right here in Washington, D.C., where I sit. He shapes and oversees the RTC's policy agenda, including federal and state legislation and rulemaking, grassroots movement building, program initiatives, and research. With an expert knowledge of the political relationships and maneuvering that influences the outcomes of Capitol Hill, Kevin is a national leader in the effort to ensure trails, biking, and walking remain key elements of America's transportation policy. You can read more about Kevin's work at rails-to-trails.org. I'm joined today by Kevin Mills of the Rails-to-Trails Conservancy. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us here on Pedalshift.
Thanks for having me.
I'm particularly interested in all of the goings on here with the Great American Rail Trail, but I think as just a threshold matter, can you explain what the Great American Rail Trail is and why people who are into bicycle touring, the folks who listen to this show, should be excited about it?
Yeah, so it's a cross-country multi-use trail from Washington, D.C. to Washington State, so nearly 4,000 miles. It's going to be primarily on former railroad corridors. It's going to serve hikers and bicyclists throughout the route and many other users based on local demand, such as equestrians, cross-country skiers, and snowmobiles. And it'll be the only cross-country route that'll be bikeable, separated from traffic from end to end.
And that's the thing that's what's been missing for folks who bicycle across country. That, people will be able to maybe route a route of their own that will include some of these trails. But the ultimate final goal here would be a fully on-trail, no road route whatsoever. Am I understanding that right?
Right.
That's incredible. What prompted the selection of the gateway trails that are forming the backbone of the larger network? I mean, just as a little bit of background for folks who are listening, right now, as we sit here in January of 2019, there is an incomplete route essentially set up that are made up of these gateway trails. Why did you choose the ones that you chose, and what was sort of the process behind that?
So what we did is focus on some treasured existing trails in each state that we think are going to help people understand that the route's viable, it's more than half complete already, and these are valuable pieces of infrastructure that provide critical connections for this cross-country trail, and that's, of course, thanks to leadership of trail advocates and managers all across the route. But having these gateways makes it easier to see that users will gain a trail that's going to be safe and accessible for all ages and abilities, and the communities are going to experience improvements in public health, economic development, and clean and affordable mobility. In terms of the gateway trails that we've featured, they represent some, but by no means all, of these treasured existing trails that'll make up the route. We selected the gateways based upon an analysis of trails that well represent what we aim to offer across the country, that make these critical connections, and for which our state and local partners were enthusiastic to put them forward as these key connections and examples of what the Great American Rail Trail will become. But by the way, Tim, though, I believe you used the word network, and I want to commend that because we very much see this project as contributing the spine of a nationwide network of trails, and we're increasingly seeing robust regional trail networks in communities all across America. And a spine like this can knit those together between regions and between states. So it's really no different than how the railroads or roads were built out, and we're ready to do the same for trails.
It strikes me that the overall project, the goal of all of this, is not unlike how some of the existing trails that are out there, especially some of the longer ones like the Great Allegheny Passage, were built. It was an existing network of smaller trails that were eventually knitted together into one larger one, but those smaller trails still exist and their identities still exist. And it strikes me that all of the different partners in these gateway trails, they have different needs, they have different constituencies, and keeping their identity is probably somewhat important, but the prospect of being connected into a larger network would be a huge boon for them. Is that what you're sort of discovering as this has gone along?
Exactly, right. This is, it's about creating a bigger vision, but it's also about lifting up all the trails that already exist along the route. I mean, we commend them for their leadership in getting us to this point, and that's what shows that this is viable to knit together. And we want this to be something that's really going to propel us all forward and create more interest and demand for what we're all trying to do.
Wanted to dive a little bit into the network, basically, some of these gateway trails. And folks listening here, check it out at greatamericanrailtrail.org. You can see all of that. I think on the last show I put out, I tried to give the Rails to Trails URL, which was really long. It's much better to have greatamericanrailtrail.org to say in an audio medium like this. But I'm looking at it, and of course, I'm very DC-centric. I'm based in DC, and I'm looking at a shorter trail like the Capitol Crescent, which has been identified as a gateway trail. It's a great trail. It's only about 11 miles long. It obviously holds a nice piece for what the ultimate project would be. But I'm also seeing something like the Great Allegheny Passage, which I mentioned just earlier there. It's missing from this initial gateway trail list. I'm curious, why are there instances where we have smaller trails? I think there was one in Wyoming as well, that it makes sense probably in the grander scheme of things, but why are they identified as gateway trails, whereas some larger ones that seem to fit, if you look at the map, are missing from it in the initial offering? Is it just sort of you haven't knitted down the partnerships yet, or what's sort of the idea behind all of that?
Yeah, so at this point in the process, for us, it isn't about length. We were looking for trails in each state that the Great American Rail Trail will traverse, that we see as part of making the overall route possible. So the Capitol Crescent Trail is a critical connection for the DC segment, and it well represents what the users will experience. Now, Pennsylvania is blessed with many tremendous trails, including the Great Allegheny Pass, which is a trail that I've ridden more than once and dearly love. But we've also got the Panhandle Trail, which is a literal gateway between Pennsylvania and West Virginia. It's an essential connection in this route that delivers a rustic small town experience for trail users. So we're celebrating that right now, but there'll be much more to celebrate going forward, including new trails and additional existing trails.
According to the press release that RTC put out, there's plans for a more precise route that's coming out this spring. So I'm starting to see that this isn't the end of the game here, that there are other trails that you're talking about as well. I'm curious because the suggestion, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, is that this more precise route that's coming out in the spring may be a complete end-to-end route that would include possibly road connections between the gateway trails. Am I misunderstanding that? And if so, are there going to be, if road connections aren't going to be provided, are there additional trails that are scheduled, for lack of a better word, to be released that would be part of the growing network that we're talking about here?
Yeah, great question, Tim. So RTC is working with representatives of more than 125 trails as well as state partners to finalize the route that we're going to share in the spring. And we will absolutely include additional trails between those gateway trails in that next announcement. And by the way, that announcement is going to be in conjunction with the 150th anniversary of the Golden Spike that marked the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. So at that point, we're going to show all the open trails that we plan to include, as well as many planned and project trails that are far enough along to reveal. Now, as to on-road connections, there's likely to be some in this early phase of project development, but our aim ultimately is to complete a route that would be separated from traffic virtually the entire way. So the core idea here is for the trail to be safe and enjoyable for people of all ages and abilities. So that spring announcement is going to show the viability of this ambitious national infrastructure project. It may not yet quite serve as a guide for how to travel the full route.
I have a funny feeling that there are going to be a lot of people out there who are going to be trying to find ways to connect those dots, because there is a great community of folks out there who will share their routes through things like Ride with GPS and all of the various different kinds of online tools that are available. And with Google Maps road routing, boy, this could be really exciting that we'd be able to finally link these types of things together in almost a crowdsourcing type of way. Is there any kind of thought that that type of crowdsourcing might be helpful for, I don't know, blazing the trail for the future for what the RTC project largely is looking at? I'm reminded of the old story that Walt Disney used to not put down sidewalks in his theme parks, and he would wait for people to sort of put in those the trails of where they would go directly, and then he would pour down the concrete on top of that. Maybe that's not quite the right analogy here, but I'm curious if that is at all part of the thought process for this.
Yeah, so just thinking out loud here, I think your idea is an interesting one in the very early going, when people are going to be chomping at the bit to go on this kind of epic journey. And if there are any, pieces not yet defined, maybe this is how people find their way through early. As for the infrastructure building, and we certainly be open to all ways of gaining wisdom, including crowdsourcing. But there's a whole lot of analysis that goes into where are there corridors for which it will be viable to work your way through. And that's something we've been working on for some time just to get to this point. So I think that's some of what you'll see in the announcement is some of that analysis of what we learned about what's the most doable way to move forward.
The thing that really blew me away reading some of the materials in the press release is that the route as of right now, or at least the ultimate goal of the route, it's already 50% complete based on the trails that you've identified. Because we're that close, is there some kind of a goal date for the full completion of the Great American Rail Trail, the off-road version of it? And if there isn't, are there smaller benchmarks that you might be willing to share about connecting some of these gateway trails? And one, for instance, that stands out to me is connecting the Panhandle Trail to the Ohio to Erie Trail. I mean, that would be a major, major connection right there, because all of a sudden you're getting from the middle of Ohio, the Kentucky-Ohio border essentially all the way to DC, which would be kind of amazing. Curious what you can share with us here.
Sure. Well, we certainly will have golden benchmarks of those sorts. Some of those we're going to share as part of the spring route reveal. Others will be developed over time as we work through specific challenges with partners in the states along the route. But from that route reveal, you're going to be able to see key connections that we intend to make. And as for the big picture, what I'd say is we expect the entire route to be completed in the coming decades, with segments coming online each year. But with that trail already half complete, and that is something we had in mind. This idea has actually been alive at RTC since our early days in the 1980s. But we felt like pulling together a viable route of half the length from infrastructure on the ground would be a good trigger point to get serious about how do you fill in all the gaps and pull it together. And so with that complete, there are many places that are already ready for people to explore.
I think that laying down the marker of this being a decades-long project for completion is probably really important, because I know that a lot of folks that, when this was initially put out within the last few days, last week or so, I think folks were sort of like, oh, the concrete's already poured and we're ready to roll. But I think it's sort of tapped the brakes a little bit, folks, here. But that being said, I think that there is a lot of excitement. Just this morning, the Adventure Cycling Association put out on Twitter, even if it takes decades to complete, this trail will be a treasure for the U.S. REI, I think within the last 24 hours said, called it incredible. We can't wait to ride it. The first of these is an important constituency group that would use the trail. The latter's a corporate retailer that would potentially benefit with a ton of sales from people looking to bike the trail. Are you looking into corporate sponsorships as a vehicle to connecting these trails up, sort of the REI connector trail, for instance? Is that something that's, obviously it's not a done deal yet or anything like that, but is that a prospective thing that RTC would consider for finding ways to make these links up?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a long-term commitment on our part, and we are absolutely going to have to be creative about how we do this and how we accelerate the pace of completion. And so, funding strategies will be part of that, and that'll run the whole gamut from federal to state to local to private sources. We're going to turn over all those rocks and figure out how to make this American asset available to the public as soon as possible.
That sort of telegraphs my next question, which is about, and I'm old enough to have been involved in transportation related policy work, that these used to be called Tiger grants, but now they're called build grants for federal funding of these types of multimodal projects. Is there any thought to pursuing a build grant that would and how would that impact completion, do you think?
So, we already can use existing sources of federal funding, including build, including the Transportation Alternatives Program, which is federal money administered by the states. We can also tap into state, local, and private dollars where those opportunities exist. So we're going to do all of that to address gaps in the trail. But I really like your question, because we're absolutely committed to working to secure additional resources to accelerate this development even further of this trail and trail networks overall. So we're working to position the trail for federal funding as well as state funding in those states where there's a relevant policy debate ripening. So build is absolutely one of those options. And we also have a reauthorization of the federal transportation bill that's due in 2020.
And I think it's also important to note that Rails-to-Trails Conservancy, what you all do is essentially when there are abandoned rail lines that open up, that those are resources that are identified. And I presume that somewhere in this corridor, and probably in multiple spots in this corridor, there are potentially rail lines that are getting to the point of abandonment. I know that might not be something you can necessarily say yes or no to in any specifics, but I'm curious, is that a piece of some of these incomplete areas, filling in these gaps?
Yeah, of course. And certainly part of the needs assessment we're doing now, and the opportunities really, is that we're identifying places where there are already corridors that are available for use that that are not yet trail and are no longer rail. So it's not only about when that happens anew. Sometimes there's existing opportunities of that sort. So we do track announcements of when that happens. So that is absolutely part of our method.
When I first heard about this project, the first thing I thought about was what was happening up north of the border in Canada and their equally bold Great Trail project. Also, there's the Trans-Canada Trail. I'm curious if RTC or any of any of the discussions with any of the partners in this amazing plan, are there any lessons learned for how Canada approached the Great Trail? And what are they? And I'm just curious if that was something that was helpful in the development of this project.
Yeah, so as the world's longest recreational trail, the Great Trail is certainly an inspiration for us. And we share many ideas with them, such as stringing together the existing local trails, creatively deploying different funding sources, and making good use of unused former rail corridors. In the wake of our Gateway announcement, Great Trail leaders indicated that they're excited by our vision And some trail users in their orbit have begun to enthuse about how they could make loops of both trails as an epic double cross-country ride. So all that's been pretty fun to see. But one thing I'd say is the geographic and political context is really different, so our path to success isn't going to be the same. Our co-founder, David Burwell, conceived of the Great American Rail Trail back in the 80s, but it wasn't, to us, it wasn't really yet ripe to focus on that idea. Our first pursuit had to be to empower trail champions all across the country to build trails on the tens of thousands of miles of former rail corridor that were not being used at that point, and more coming, each year. And so, but now with those trails on the ground, we set out to build rich regional trail networks in communities all over the country over the last 15 years or so. And now we're turning our attention to this spine across the country that we see as weaving together the regional trails into a nationwide network of trails. In Canada, by contrast, they were quicker to pursue their cross-country vision, and as I understand it, their federal government served as a really big driver of the project. So while we intend to convince the U.S. government to be a full partner in this endeavor, we see this as each of the states along the route being critical champions for their statewide trails, and then we need to then bring all those statewide trails together to comprise the cross-country route. And so that leads to a different approach to organizing and implementing. But in my opinion, this is a really intriguing process, which ultimately should foster really strong local stakes in this trail.
I'm curious, what is the best way to get involved and support the Great American Rail Trail if you're interested in this project?
So we're at the beginning of a really long venture, and we're going to need public support throughout the process to be successful. To stay plugged in to evolving opportunities to get involved and to help, your best option is to go to our website. And as you mentioned, we've got a section of our website set up as greatamericanrailtrail.org. We also, of course, have Rails-to-Trails.org as our flagship website, and you can link to it from there. But on there's going to be a chance to get updates, a button there that you can choose to get updates. And so I think that would be a good way to raise your hand and say, I want to keep abreast of what's happening here and get involved. Of course, we're also a membership organization and would love to have your listeners opt to join. Basically, together we can do this. So that's we love your support.
Kevin, thanks so much for joining us, and everybody go check out greatamericanrailtrail.org. This is, as I said in the last episode, a bold moonshot when it comes to crossing this country by bike. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tim.
The first time I caught wind of the Great American Rail Trail, the first word that came to mind was bold. This is an exciting project. It is not happening tomorrow. It's not happening the day after tomorrow. But the bones are there. The network is there. These gateway trails, if you look at a map, you can see what the future vision is. And, we've got a tradition in the United States about moonshots. Jack Kennedy boldly declaring that we were going to put a person on the moon and bring them back safely by the end of the decade. And I think that that's a kind of thing that is really invigorating and frankly a bit inspiring as well. There is a very good likelihood that within our lifetimes, this kind of project is going to reach its full extent. We see this on smaller scales with regional trails. I mentioned it in the interview. The Great Allegheny Passage started the same way. It was a whole bunch of little trails that people had the vision and the gumption to basically join together because they could see how it would all work. And it's become a really great thing. Well, now we're looking to do this at the national level, and I'm really excited for everybody that's involved with this, because it's not just the Rails-to-Trails Conservancy, although there have been great leaders in kind of pulling this together, but all of the small trails, all of the people involved at the local, state, and federal level. But I'm really looking forward to seeing what The announcement is going to be like in May when the route is revealed with a few more details. So I'm going to be following this. I hope you will be as well. Big thanks to Kevin for coming on the show and giving us as much of an overview as possible at this point, because this is going to really be an amazing, amazing add-on to bicycling in the United States. It's going to not only be great for folks here in this country, but I think it's going to attract people from around the world. As always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedalshift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedalshift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours like my upcoming XFL trip this winter. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lien, Andrew MacGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Marco Loeb, Terrance Manson, Noah Schroer, Harry Telgadas, Chris Barron, Mark Van Raam, Brad Hipwell, Stuart Buchan, Todd Stutz, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Roxy Arning, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LoGreco, Paul Culbertson, Scott Culbertson, Cody Floerchinger, Tom Benenati, Greg Braithwaite, John Mayer, Richard Patch, Mark Messer, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Dave Roll, Joseph Quinn, Susan Brewster, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joachim Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Hankel, and thanks also to all past and anonymous contributors for making the show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.